In the early 13th century, while the rest of France was a land of grim feudal loyalty and rigid dogma, the southern region known as the Languedoc was a world apart. Bathed in Mediterranean sun, it was a land of troubadours and courtly love, of vibrant trade, and of powerful, independent nobles who fostered a remarkable climate of culture and tolerance. But in this land of poetry and light, a different kind of faith was flourishing. A faith that the Catholic Church in Rome saw as a dark and cancerous threat. They were known as the Cathars. They did not call themselves this. They simply referred to one another as good Christians. The Cathars held a belief system that struck at the very heart of Catholic doctrine. They were dualists. They believed the universe was a battleground between two opposing gods. The first, the good God, created the spiritual world heaven, the soul, all things unseen and eternal. The second, an evil lesser god, whom they equated with the Satan of the Old Testament, created the entire physical world, the earth, the body, and all material things, including the corrupt institution of the Catholic Church itself, because the body was a prison for the soul. They rejected procreation. They dismissed the sacraments, denied that Christ was ever truly a man of flesh, and saw the cross not as a symbol of salvation, but as an instrument of torture. Their spiritual elite, known as the Perfects, were men and women who lived lives of extreme asceticism and poverty, a stark contrast to the immense wealth and power of the Catholic bishops. For decades, the Church in Rome tried to extinguish this fire of heresy with words. Pope Innocent III, one of the most powerful and intelligent popes in history, sent his best preachers, including the future Saint Dominic, to debate the Cathars and win the people back. But they failed. The Cathar Perfects were skilled debaters, and their simple, pious lives were more respected by the local populace than the opulent lifestyles of the Catholic clergy. The Pope's frustration grew. Then, in January 1208, the final straw, a papal legate, a representative of the Pope named Pierre de Castelnau, was murdered after a heated argument with the region's most powerful lord, Count Raymond VI of Toulouse, for Pope Innocent. This was the ultimate insult. Diplomacy had failed. Now, he would turn to the sword. The murder of his legate gave Pope Innocent III the justification he had been waiting for. He unleashed a weapon of terrifying power, a crusade. But this was a crusade of a new and sinister kind. For the first time, the full spiritual and military force of a holy war was being directed not at Muslims in the Holy Land, but at Christians in the heart of Christendom. To attract an army, the Pope made an unprecedented offer. He issued a papal bull declaring that any man who fought for just 40 days against the heretics of the Languedoc would receive the same indulgence as a crusader who journeyed to Jerusalem the Complete. Forgiveness of all confessed sins. It was a spiritual masterstroke, a convenient and irresistible offer for the knights of Europe. Why endure a perilous, multi-year journey to the Middle East when you could achieve the same salvation in a 40-day campaign just next door? But heavenly reward was only half of the equation. The other half was earthly greed. The Languedoc was one of the wealthiest and most desirable regions in Europe, and the northern French barons, living in a poorer, more militaristic society, looked upon it with envious eyes. The crusade was a divine license for a hostile takeover. It gave these land-hungry knights a holy pretext to invade, conquer, and seize the rich castles and fertile lands of the south for themselves. This toxic combination of piety and plunder attracted a massive army, a volatile mix of genuinely zealous pilgrims, professional soldiers of fortune, and ruthless opportunists, all marching under the banner of the cross. This formidable force was led by two men who embodied the Crusade's dual nature. The spiritual leader was the papal legate, Arnaud Amaury, a Cistercian abbot who possessed an unbending, fanatical conviction that the heresy had to be exterminated at any cost. The military commander was Simon de Montfort, a minor nobleman from northern France, but a brilliant, brutal, and deeply pious tactician. He was the perfect instrument for this kind of war, a man who genuinely believed he was doing God's work while simultaneously carving out a new kingdom for himself. Caught in the path of this gathering storm was Count Raymond VI of Toulouse, the most powerful lord in the Languedoc. A sophisticated but politically weak ruler, Raymond was no Cathar, but he tolerated them in his lands. He desperately tried to appease the Pope, even submitting to a humiliating public flogging to prove his loyalty. But it was too late. The crusading army, tens of thousands strong, gathered at Lyon in the summer of 1209. They were not interested in Raymond's penance. Their eyes and their swords were set on the lands of Raymond's nephew, the Viscount Trincavel, whose cities of Béziers and Carcassonne were known to be thriving centers of the Cathar faith. The storm was about to break. In the heart of the scorching summer of 1209, the great crusading army arrived before the walls of Béziers, a bustling, prosperous city on the banks of the Orbe River. It was the first major target in the Trincavel lands, a city known for its defiant spirit and its large population of Cathars living peacefully alongside their Catholic neighbors. The Crusaders' spiritual leader, the papal legate Arnaud Amaury, issued a chilling ultimatum. He presented the city leaders with a list of 220 known Cathar heretics and demanded they be surrendered to the army for justice. To refuse, he warned, would mean the entire city would be treated as heretical. The leaders of Béziers convened a council to hand over their own citizens, many of whom were respected members of the community. Was an unthinkable betrayal. Confident in their strong walls and believing no Christian army would dare to annihilate a Christian city, they sent back their defiant refusal. It was an act of honor that would seal their doom. The siege that followed was not a long, drawn-out affair of strategy and attrition. The city fell in a matter of hours, not to a planned assault by the noble knights, but to a chaotic, violent rush by the army's lowest elements. A band of mercenaries and camp followers known as *Ribauds*, eager for plunder, launched a reckless, unauthorized charge against one of the city gates. The defenders, perhaps overconfident, mounted a sortie to drive them back. It was a fatal error. The attackers exploited the opening, pouring through the gate and into the city. Seeing that the city was breached and not wanting the mercenaries to claim all the spoils, the disciplined knights of the crusade plunged in after them. All order, all rules of war, instantly dissolved. What followed was a scene of unimaginable horror. The crusaders swept through the streets, slaughtering everything in their path. There was no attempt to distinguish between Catholic and Cathar, between man, woman, or child. Citizens fleeing the carnage sought refuge in the city's churches, believing they would be safe on holy ground. Thousands packed into the cavernous Church of Mary Magdalene. The Crusaders smashed down the heavy doors and massacred every soul inside. The blood running so deep it was said to have pooled at the altar. It was during this slaughter that the Crusade's most infamous moment allegedly occurred. According to the Cistercian chronicler Caesarius of Heisterbach, writing years later, a soldier approached the papal legate, Arnaud or Maury, and asked him how they should distinguish the heretics from the faithful Catholics. Amori's supposed reply has echoed through the darkest corridors of history. Asterisk cedit eos, navit enum dominus qui sunt ius. Asterisk, kill them all, for the Lord knows those who are his. While historians debate whether he uttered these exact words, the sentiment perfectly encapsulated the horrific reality of the event. The sack of Béziers was not a battle. It was a calculated act of mass terror. Amaury himself, in a letter to the Pope, boasted that his forces had put nearly 20,000 people to the sword. The number was likely an exaggeration, but the message it sent across the Languedoc was clear and terrifying. Submit or suffer the same fate. This was not a war of conversion. This was a war of annihilation. The news of the horror at Béziers spread like wildfire, functioning exactly as the Crusade leaders had intended. It was a masterstroke of psychological warfare. When the massive army arrived at the gates of Carcassonne, the next major city in their path, its people were already paralyzed with fear. After a short siege, the heavily fortified city surrendered. Its people were spared the sword, but they were forced to leave the city with nothing but the clothes on their backs, their lands and homes forfeited to the Crusaders. It was here that Simon de Montfort, the ruthless and ambitious northern baron, was appointed the new Viscount of the conquered territories and the military leader of the Crusade. The war for souls had officially become a war of conquest. What was intended as a swift 40-day campaign soon devolved into a brutal 20-year war of attrition. The lords of the Languedoc, realizing that this was a hostile takeover sanctioned by the Church, began to fight back with fierce determination. The conflict became a bloody grind of sieges, counter-sieges, raids, and betrayals. Simon de Montfort proved to be a brilliant, if savage, commander. He used terror as a weapon, frequently holding public mass burnings of captured Cathar perfects at Minerve. He had 140 perfects burned on a giant pyre at Lavore, another 400. His goal was to break the spiritual and military will of the South. But the Southern resistance was stubborn. In 1218, during a protracted siege to reclaim the city of Toulouse, Simon de Montfort's reign of terror came to an abrupt end. A stone, launched from a Mongol on the city walls, that was reportedly being operated by the women of Toulouse, struck him squarely on the head, killing him instantly. The death of its champion did not end the crusade. De Montfort's son was unable to hold his father's conquests, and the disorder gave the French monarchy the opportunity it had been waiting for. King Louis VIII launched a new royal crusade, but his motive was now purely political: to crush the independent power of the southern nobility. and annex the wealthy Languedoc into the Kingdom of France once and for all. By 1229, the military phase of the war was over. The south was broken, but the Cathar faith, though battered and bloodied, was not extinguished. It had simply gone underground, its believers hiding in forests and mountain villages. To finish the job, Pope Gregory IX unleashed a new, more insidious weapon. In the 1230s, he perfected and empowered the Medieval Inquisition, a mobile, bureaucratic force of trained interrogators, primarily Dominican friars. Their mission was to hunt down the heresy that the sword could not destroy. They used a systematic process of investigation, informers, and psychological torture to methodically dismantle the Cathar faith from the inside out, one believer at a time. By the 1240s, the Cathar faith had been driven to the brink of extinction. Its followers were scattered, hunted by the relentless agents of the Inquisition. Their last significant refuge, their final sanctuary and symbolic heart, was the remote mountain fortress of Montségur, perched atop a dramatic, steep-sided peak in the Pyrenees. The castle was a formidable defensive position, a place its defenders called the Ark of the New Covenant. For years, it had served as a base for the remaining Cathar perfects, a community in the clouds where they could practice their faith in defiance of a world that wanted them dead. But by 1243, the French crown and the church had decided that this final beacon of heresy had to be extinguished. A royal army of several thousand soldiers arrived at the base of the mountain and began the final siege for 10 brutal months. The few hundred defenders of Montségur held out against impossible odds. Through the harsh winter, they repelled assaults and endured starvation. Their resolve hardened by their faith, but by March of 1244, their situation was hopeless. A small group of audacious Basque mercenaries in the royal army managed to scale a sheer cliff face at night and seize a key outer fortification, allowing the army to bring their heavy siege engines to bear on the main fortress. The end was near. A truce was negotiated, and the defenders of Montségur were given a terrible choice: renounce their faith and submit to the Inquisition, or be burned at the stake. For 15 days, a truce held as the Cathars inside prepared for their fate. On March 16th, the gates of the fortress opened. Over 200 Cathar prefects, men and women who had dedicated their lives to their ascetic faith, refused to recant. They were marched down the mountain to a field where a massive pyre of wood and straw had been constructed. There was no need for force. In a final, defiant act of martyrdom, they calmly said their goodbyes, walked into the enclosure, and were burned alive. This great bonfire at the foot of Montségur effectively broke the back of the Cathar religion. The Inquisition would spend the next few decades hunting down the last scattered believers, but the faith as an organized entity was gone. The Albigensian Crusade was over. It had succeeded in its goal. The Cathar heresy was annihilated. A unique, tolerant, and vibrant culture in the Languedoc was destroyed, and the region was permanently absorbed into the Kingdom of France. But its legacy was far darker. It set a terrifying precedent for the use of holy war as a tool for internal political suppression. It perfected the bureaucratic and psychological machinery of the Inquisition, a system of persecution that would haunt Europe for centuries. The Cathars are now a ghost in history, a faith and a people erased by fire and dogma. Their story stands as a chilling, eternal warning of how easily piety can be twisted into a justification for genocide, and how completely a culture can be wiped from the face of the earth.